All right. Hello, Seulki, and welcome to the Magic and Medicine podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited and honored to have you here. You have been, for me, a very wonderful source as a teacher and kind of mentor and colleague and space holder since we reconnected this past September. So it felt very right for me to have you on as my first guest. So thank you for showing up and for being here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so I would love to just start out the episode with, any kind of introduction or background you'd like to give, letting our listeners know a little bit about, who you are and kind of how you came to be on this path.
Okay, well, thanks. Um, well, specifically on the boundaries path, I was raised in a family where having boundaries was really dangerous. So I was pretty much trained to not have boundaries. So that meant I didn't feel my own boundaries and I didn't understand the boundaries of other people. So as a young adult, I was actually a pretty unsafe person to be around because, like I didn't understand anyone's boundaries, including myself or my own. And I ended up noticing that, like in social situations, I was extremely uncomfortable because I could tell that other people were uncomfortable because of me, because of things I said and did, but I didn't know what I said and did that was so wrong. And so, just to fit in socially in my late teens, early 20s, I had to learn how to like have boundaries like myself through like brute force because I couldn't feel them. I couldn't feel what was right or wrong or what made people feel comfortable or uncomfortable. So I remember, like, let's say, giving gifts way too early in relationships, this kind of thing. So I,
Hmm.
I just taught myself, I just said, okay, just do half. Like, whatever you want to do, just like do half. And it still probably wasn't quite on the mark, but it was like a beginning. And I have to say, it was extremely difficult for me to even do half because there was a huge anxious part of me that thought that I'd be rejected for not, providing value. So that was the beginning where I realized that I really don't like making other people feel uncomfortable, and I don't like not understanding what's going on and feeling so incredibly awkward. I feel like I must have been like this undiagnosed autistic person. Seriously, I just did not understand social cues. And this is like, late teens, early 20s. I was like an
Mhm.
adult. And so I was really on this boundary thing. And as you can imagine, it's a little bit hard to learn your boundaries. Like, how do you do that? And so much, 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 much later, when I was pretty much a transformational workshop junkie, I ran across something called the Wheel of Consent in the context of a workshop, and it was like slapdash displayed, and I didn't really understand it very well, and I thought it was just the content of the workshop, and I couldn't learn it further. When I was just like going on and on about it to someone, he was like, it was invented by a woman called Dr. Betty Martin, and this is her life's work, and you can go train with her. And I was like, are you kidding me? So I booked, so I booked the next training. And then I did this training with Dr. Betty Martin. And so after that, I started to teach the Wheel of Consent verbatim, just as she taught me. Like, just as she taught me, I copied it and I taught it to other people. And over time, because I also was doing psychic work, I was doing psychic healing work, and I was also teaching, I had to bring in that shadow stuff into the wheel little by little by little over time. And so over time, the wheel has changed for me in the way that I teach it. I feel as if I've gone like way far from the source in a good and great way. And I teach things like the inner and the outer wheel, like the inner dynamic that happens that influences the outer dynamic that happens. I map a lot of shadow on there. I map a lot of entities on there. I map a lot of inner mother, inner father, inner child stuff. And therefore, I talk much more about boundaries and the dynamics in your shadow that then appear in your exterior life. Whereas the classic Wheel of Consent has much more to do with you and someone else, and touch. And it's a little bit more focused on this kind of thing. But my Wheel of Consent is much more focused on self-development and self-awareness.
Thank you for sharing that. Um, to just kind of almost like zoom out a little bit and just get like back to the kind of foundations of what we're talking about, I'd love for you to give your definition of what boundaries are, because I feel like, you and I, or I have been working on my boundaries for a while, and you teach and hold space for boundaries. But I feel like some people might not even have access to this language and these concepts in their day-to-day life.
Sure. I mean, there's so many ways to talk about this, but I'll talk about it in two different ways. The first way is I personally think, which obviously you don't have to agree with, but I personally think that the whole point of your human existence is to be yourself.
Hmm.
And that sounds really simple. But the fact of the matter is, most people, especially people who are raised in Western cultures, they have a really hard time being themselves. And most people don't even know who they really are. So they kind of go off of the thing that they just kind of fell into. Their job is something they fell into. Their relationship is something they fell into. All these kinds of things. And they don't feel right with their mom, but they like kind of hang out with her anyway. There are all these things where they're not quite comfortable.
Hmm.
People aren't comfortable. So they're doing this other side thing, which I'd call their ego. You're doing this other side thing, which is not you. It's the thing that you learned over time. People will accept. First your mom accepted that, and now all these other people accept that, and you think that is you. So it can be really, really hard to, in quotation marks, be yourself. And to me, your true self is usually in your shadow. So for many people, their healing journey is to find their true selves. And what I would say is that your true self is somewhere in your shadow, and your true self probably is much more powerful than the ego you front face and present to the world. So boundaries has to do with just being your true self. And if you're within your boundaries, your true self is happy. Your true self is thriving. Your true self can be her highest vibrational self. And if you're not within your boundaries, then you're probably doing that other thing. And that other thing is probably making your true self sick, and have disease and stress, all these kinds of other things. A low vibrational life, which most people have. So on the one level, like boundaries is just like, are you being your true self? Yes or no? And if you are, then you're within your boundaries. If you're not, then you're not within your boundaries. And you can tell that you're not through like one indicator is sickness, like physical illness, let alone psychological and spiritual illness. So the other way to look at boundaries is a little bit more like in the moment. Um, is it a full body yes?
Hmm.
Like, does it make your heart sing? Is your heart like super super open and you're pulled towards the other side and you really really want to do this thing? Or is it a maybe? And if it's a maybe, you're probably confused. And if you're confused, most likely it's a no. Your body says no, but your ego, which is that other thing you've been doing, your ego, which lives in your mind, is like, yes, I want to do it. I want to go to that party. I want to please that person. I want to become their friend. I want them to like me or whatever. So even if your body says no, your mind says yes, there's a conflict. So you're confused. That's why it's a maybe. So that's one kind of maybe. Another kind of maybe is like, maybe it's a little bit pleasurable, but not that pleasurable. I would say that's also a no, especially for beginners. So most people can't even feel their boundaries, because they're not in their body. And so another thing with this boundaries thing is you have to feel your body, which means you have to get out of your head. So these are the many ways in which you can define boundaries.
Thank you. Yeah, that just kind of makes me think about like, and this is a big question too, but what do you think are the kind of forces or structures in society that kind of set us up from childhood to not feel our boundaries and to not be in our body and to not feel comfortable um, being our full selves?
That's a great question. That's a super great question. So I would say that it's an extraordinarily common experience, especially for those raised in the West, to have a mother who was overwhelmed
Hmm.
at being a mother. And so she just didn't channel the divine mother, completely. So the transmission of the divine mother that we usually receive is someone who's scarce, short on time, needs help taking care of herself, actually. Like our mothers needed help from us, the children. Whereas it's supposed to be the other way around, like Mother Nature never tells a bird, oh my God, I'm having such a hard time growing this papaya for you to eat. Can you like give me some of your energy, bird, so I can just even give you this papaya,
Mm.
for you to eat, and it's like that never happens, right? But like as humans, we seem to have experienced that quite a bit. So there's this like perverted sense of mother-child relationship. And that's the first place where you learn boundaries, because your mother is supposed to be attuned to the baby. And when she's attuned to the baby, she tells the baby, oh, you're sleepy now, that's why you're crying, so I'm going to put you to bed. Or
Mm,
you're hungry now, that's why you're crying, and so I'm not going to feed you. It's like the mom is supposed to know the baby better than the baby, you know, and therefore teach the baby his or her own boundaries as they're growing up. But instead, this gets perverted. And then the baby is rewarded for not feeling their boundaries, but merging with the mom and serving the mom's boundaries instead. So, whether you're emotionally helping your mom or physically helping your mom or whatever, most people had to help their mom in some kind of way just for mom to be like quasi mom. So you could quasi get some kind of love from her. So that's the original perversion, I would say. So the first layer, or the first thing that happens where you learn to not feel your boundaries, where it's extremely hard to feel your boundaries, actually, is this lack of divine mother transmission from your biological mother. And another way to look at it is this other way. This other way is like, well, as humans, we are a collective kind of being. We live in tribes. That's natural. And so when you're a baby, forget about the tribe. But when you're a baby, if your mom rejects you for whatever reason, you're going to be left out on the savannah to die. So you
mhm.
don't want your mom to reject you. So if she's, a Jehovah's Witness, you're a Jehovah's Witness. If she's like a pagan, you're a pagan. Like whatever your mom is, you're just gonna do. You're just gonna do it, so she won't reject you. So there's that level of it too, and that's like aside from this divine mother transmission thing. So as a collectivistic individual, as a human species being, we don't want to be rejected by our mothers, so we just copy her. So even if we don't agree with her, even if her shtick is not in alignment with our true selves, we develop our ego to like go along with her shtick, right? And then we grow older, and we're also part of society. And if you think of a tribe, like unless you have the help and acceptance of the tribe and the resources of the tribe, you will also die. You will also be left out on the savannah to die. If the tribe doesn't like you and rejects you for who you are, you will die. So you also have to go along with the shtick of your particular tribe, whatever your tribe is like, right? And so for those two reasons, we fit in with the culture that our mom kind of has for herself as an individual. And then we also kind of like have to fit in with the culture at large. And I really want to point out how arbitrary this is. It's so sad to me. It's so arbitrary because, not too long ago, let's say you identify as queer or gay or trans, like, holy shit, like your tribe will definitely reject you. And
Mm.
probably your mom would also reject you. But like now, or maybe 15 years into the future, you're not going to be left out on the savannah to die. And so like it's just what's in vogue, what's like on trend nowadays. Nowadays being a witch is like cool, and 150 years ago, oh yeah, you will more than left out on the savannah to die. You'd be like stoned to death. So it's like it's just that is so arbitrary. It kind of makes me sad, but that's the case. Like all these arbitrary things make us not feel our boundaries just because of what's in style based on when we're born.
I mean, that's huge. That's like, our yeah, our literal survival, whether that be physically, being left out to die or like emotionally or financially like being cut off, like that's based on the decisions of our parents, which as you said is based on the uh kind of ideas or, popular ideas or concepts that are kind of running our society at the time. So that's really kind of profound for our yeah, for us to have to morph and change and to also in a way like sacrifice parts of ourselves or let parts of our our authentic selves to die just to be able to have our basic survival needs met. um
Yeah. Yeah, you're right on the money there.
yeah. It just yeah, it kind of just hit me in one of those like my, brain exploding kind of ways. um yeah, so you've talked about boundaries, you've talked about the kind of setup that we're, you know, that is foisted upon us as we are, little babies and then growing into humans into this world. I'm curious, what what you would say about, what is when people begin to do this boundaries work. And by boundaries work, I mean, becoming aware of your boundaries and beginning to adjust your life, adjust your interactions, adjust your commitments in a way that creates integrity for yourself and creates integrity and protection for your energy and your uniqueness and your freedom. So when people begin to do this boundaries work, how do you think it serves them? How do you think it's medicine? How do you think it can be healing for their lives or their autonomy or their energy?
That's an amazing question. I think there's at least two ways to look at this question. So I'll talk about it one way first. Um, and you might need to remind me of the second way in case I forget. The second way has something to do with mother wounds and stuff. But anyway, the first way is okay. If you just think about it, boundaries are masculine. Boundaries are like yes, no, linear. They're kind of like one side of the line or other side of the line. And another way to like visualize a boundary is just a container for water.
Mm,
The water is feminine, right? The water is intuition. The water is the inner child. And the container is masculine. The container, in the case of the mother and the child, even though the mother is feminine identified most likely, she is the masculine to her child.
mm,
Uh, the mother creates order for her child. The mother goes, it's time to go to bed, it's time to get up, these kinds of things. And when we grow older, that is how our masculine and feminine interact with each other. Or if we have masculine and feminine partners or counterparts, like that's how our masculines and feminines play with each other. Like even if you have masculine and feminine and your partner has masculine and feminine, those things all play with each other in that way. So if you have issues with your boundaries, like you can't even feel them, or you have bad boundaries, that's what most people say, I have bad boundaries. That means there's disorder with their masculine.
mm,
Like their masculine is, I would say, immature or stunted in growth. And therefore, literally, there's like no masculine to depend upon. So where does the freaking water go in that container? There's no container. It's a crumpled, messed up container. Where does that water go? That water now needs to become something other than water to just hold it together. So you can see the anxiety that happens. You can see that this water has to take on some form that's not natural to her. So most people who have, let's say, messed up boundaries or they're beginning on their boundary journey, their feminine is usually scared. She doesn't trust herself. She probably doesn't trust other people. She probably invites in interactions where she's violated. She probably violates herself all the time, which mimics how her mom violated her. And she's masculinized because there's no like internal dude around to do the dude thing. So she needs to become the dude. So she becomes this like masculinized feminine. And so the feminine within everyone, no matter what your gender identity, like the feminine can't be feminine. The feminine can't relax. The feminine can't be abundant. She can't surrender. She can't have joy. She can't orgasm. So there isn't this transmission of the divine feminine, of the divine mother, of like abundance. It's really, really hard. And so how boundaries can be healing is that it heals this disorder. Where finally, if you start to develop your boundaries, you finally have a masculine, like an actual masculine, like will hold the freaking water in the water container. Now the water can relax and just be, Yeah. And this is creativity. This is art. This is dancing. This is singing. This is money. This
mm,
is having like an enjoyable life. Because before she was doing something else to kind of hold it together, there was anxiety and fear, and there was no trust. There's no surrender. So if you start to have boundaries and do your boundary work, then what you are doing is step by step by step developing a mature masculine. And what that means is that now you can have a mature feminine who's just feminine. She doesn't have to be this masculinized feminine doing the dude's job for him because he's not there. He's a little boy. She can be this like woman, who orgasms, who has, like all the feels. She can be chaotic and she can be crazy and she can be like, I have an idea, and the masculine's like, okay, I'm there, Whereas before, she didn't have time for her ideas. She had no support. She was busy putting food on the table like a single mom. That's the feeling. So boundaries can be healing in that way, in the way of now you have a mature masculine that just like you never had before, because that's what boundaries are. They're masculine. And what that engenders is trust, surrender, an actualized feminine. And that means creativity and joy and all those other things, and abundance. So, and trust in life, which means a higher vibration like life. The other way that boundaries can be healing is you're actually going to go back and remother yourself, reparent yourself better than your biological mother or whoever raised you, usually your biological mother. You're going to parent yourself better than she did. And that's a huge thing, because most people unconsciously parent themselves the exact same way that they were raised. So if mom was too tired from work and didn't have time to see her little girl, so her little girl had dolls and playthings and drawings and just wanted mom to witness, right? So like mom is the masculine to the child. So the masculine witnesses the feminine. So the little girl always wants like, mommy, like look at this drawing I did, and like look at this dance I'm doing, and she just wants approval like all the time. And when mom's too tired to give approval, then it's kind of like my little child is annoying. The needs of my little child is annoying. And so if you grew up like this, which unfortunately is like a variation of how most people grew up, then your needs are annoying. Like now that you're an adult, like I have to pee now, but that's annoying. So I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait until I'm at the next, stop for gas or something like this. Or, like I need to take a day off, but that's annoying because I have like these like targets I want to make. So I'm not going to take a day off, and I'm just going to run myself into the ground, So most people unconsciously parent themselves or mother themselves in the exact same way that their biological mothers mothered them. So if you start to do your boundary work, the healing aspect of that is like, oh my gosh, my inner child has needs and I'm going to honor them. And that's what boundaries are. Essentially, you are listening to your body and doing what your body wants. And your body is your inner child, I would argue. So when you start to become a better mother for yourself than your biological mother was, you are literally, by definition, transcending the trauma. So you are healing. This is literally healing. And the other thing is, most people have done some kind of work on themselves if they're doing boundary work. And what they're healing from isn't necessarily the trauma that they received when they were a child. I mean, they've done a lot of work on that probably. They're probably more at the point of looking at the habit of re-traumatizing themselves and treating themselves the exact same way. It's like a habit, an unconscious pattern of like hurting themselves the exact same way as before, but that exact same way as before stemmed from the original trauma of childhood. So here you're really like working on yourself. This is very different. See, like this is very different than some people are really stuck on mom, like biological mom. I really want biological mom to see me. I really want her approval. That's like an earlier stage of this journey. A later stage of this journey is like, forget about biological mom, forget about whether or not we ever see eye to eye, if she ever loves or approves of me. If I have good boundaries, I love and approve of myself. I feel safe with myself and I witness myself. If my inner child has a dance and has like, a picture to show me, then I'll be like, oh my God, yay, and that feels better. You learn that that feels better than anything your biological mom could ever give you. So it's a big ego death, letting go, not needing anything from someone on outside anymore. That's you taking your power back.
That's exactly what this whole response has made me think is like, before when we're dependent upon, the approval of our mothers or society or whoever is, setting the rules, then our power is outside of ourselves because we need to act in a certain way. But then what you're talking about, this, reparenting, unlearning, and boundarying of yourself is like, taking your power back in and then making your own rules about, what you are allowed to do to feel safe, and also, kind of replacing that external obligation, replacing that with like, pleasure and consent based decisions and practices. And that, as a society, I feel like we aren't often socialized to like follow our pleasure and have that be like one of our own internal rules. But this kind of work, because it is so personal and so individual, it actually allows us to center our pleasure a little bit more, right?
I love that you said that. I mean, boundaries and pleasure go hand in hand. And
Mm.
it's true that pleasure is somehow taboo, I think, in our society, probably in the same way that lots of things that would empower us are taboo. So, you know?
Yep.
Yeah. Yes. And something I want to mention now, which I might talk about a little bit later, most likely, is this idea of direct pleasure. So most people feel comfortable with what Betty would call indirect pleasure, the pleasure of someone else's pleasure. So I bake a cake, but I don't even eat cake, but I made it for you so I can watch you eat the cake and enjoy you watch you eating the cake. So many people are more comfortable doing something like that, like giving a massage than receiving a massage, or if they receive a massage, it has to be someone else's idea. Like you would never say, could you please give me a massage? That is so hard for most people. It'd be also hard for people to be like, can you please bake me a cake? The kind of cake that I like, but you don't eat, like it's so
Mhm.
hard for people to ask for direct pleasure, create situations for direct pleasure in their lives. And this kind of direct pleasure practice is a huge hallmark of boundaries work and also loving yourself. Because, if you're doing that other thing where you're not your true self, you probably are grinding it, like just that's your life. Whereas if you are your true self, it's going to be naturally pleasurable. And if you feel adverse to your personal pleasure, then it'll be very uncomfortable for you to be your true self. It'll be easier to do that other thing. So practicing pleasure is really important.
Yeah, and that's another thing that we, don't necessarily learn from our mothers if they're, if we're learning that they are sacrificing their needs and their pleasure in order to, hold up the household or, do whatever it is. And we're learning that that's a normal way for especially like, women or people who are socialized as women to behave.
Oh, yes. There's a lot of hierarchy when it comes to boundaries. Like, I mean, I'll just say this. When it comes to consent, which means your boundaries plus my boundaries combined, consent is what is within both of our boundaries.
Mm.
So that means both people need to have a sense of their boundaries for us to even understand if there's consent or not. Because if one person is unsure of their boundaries, there's no way to have any kind of consent because, like, we don't know, is it within your boundaries or not? We don't even know. So we don't know if there's any consent. So it's really important for you to be a safe person for other people to interact with. You have to know your own freaking boundaries.
Mm.
Otherwise, you are an unsafe person. And what you're going to do is make other people into your violators, into your perpetrators, or into your parasites. And that doesn't feel good for the other person because they never necessarily asked for that position. However, in the dynamics of boundaries, consent, and hierarchy, whoever has more power in the hierarchy usually gets to take the position of my pleasure is more important than your pleasure.
Mm.
So mom has more higher, power in the hierarchy than baby. So mom's pleasure is more important than baby's pleasure. Um, Men in our society more power than women. So that's why women have been socialized to please men, but not the other way around, you know? And so there are all kinds of things, based on race, based on income level, like it's just whoever has more power, their pleasure is primary.
Mhm.
And whoever has less power, your default role is to help create the pleasure of the person with power. And it's like considered really weird and rejected by people if the person with less power in the hierarchy goes for their pleasure. So if baby goes for her pleasure and goes, I think our family should eat this for dinner, or I think our family should move to that country or something like that, that no one's going to listen to that. Or, in a very like unfortunately easy to imagine hypothetical, like a woman, like a female bodied person walks to work and goes, I think you should pay me this much. people like would hate that. Whereas, like a male bodied person, I think you should pay me this much. Oh yeah. Like it's so like the pleasure is like the primacy of pleasure, or the like position of who is creating whose reality is usually given to whoever has more power in the hierarchy. And um, that's something to watch out for if you care about this kind of thing. If you are interacting with people, do you have more power in the hierarchy in this given moment? And therefore, are you using that power on behalf of the pleasure of the other person? Or do you just accept that your pleasure is primary? And I see it really easily here. I live in a town where there's a lot of like American and Canadian tourists, and their pleasure is primary. And
Mm.
there's this like sense of entitlement that comes with being this person because there's more money and all this other stuff, uh, skin color, all this stuff, and it can be a little bit uncomfortable because like the default might kind of feel like the white Canadian, your pleasure is more important than the local person's. That's really uncomfortable. That's really uncomfortable. But it's kind of like a given in many circumstances, I feel, based on my observation.
Yeah, I mean, that makes me think about how, yeah, I don't know, it's kind of fucked up. Like our, our our pleasure, our safety is tied into like economics, is tied into like capitalism. So in order, even for me to survive, like, doing my other job, like I have to like, lower myself to the desire of others in order to fulfill a role, that then gives me money so that I can then, eat and feel safe. And of course, like that's very different than the experience of like a Mexican person who, has even less money than me, who has to then, do certain tasks and act in a certain way in order to please, the Canadian tourist or whoever, is paying them. Um, so it's, yeah, it's big, big stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
um, yeah, so this, boundaries work, like we've talked about, it's kind of revolutionary, it's definitely healing. Would you say that there is magic to boundaries work, and what do you think the magic of boundaries work is?
absolutely. I love this question. So, this kind of depends on your definition of magic. But here, what I would say is if you do your boundaries work, and the main thing that should, in quotation marks, should occur if you do your boundaries work is you raise your own self value. So if you have poor boundaries, most likely you are hanging around in some shame, some fear, some lack of self respect, and lack of self trust. This usually goes hand in hand with having poor boundaries. What also may happen is that you basically just automatically put yourself secondary and other
Mm.
people become primary. And so you're creating their reality, you're creating their pleasure, and you have like no direct pleasure. You only have indirect pleasure. So you're always a servant, you know? Um, and therefore, it's really hard for you to kind of put yourself first. To put yourself first is really uncomfortable because all of your relationships expect you to be the servant, the energy servant.
Mm.
So it can be really, really uncomfortable to do this boundaries work because you might lose all of those relationships because all those people expect you to be the energy servant. So if you start to do your boundaries work, yes, you may lose some of those relationships where people expect you to be their energy servant because now you're going to not do that and you're going to be your own creator of your own reality. And you're going to ask other people to serve you and help you create your reality. So you're asking them, is it within your consent to, serve me your energy, serve me your time and serve me your support for me to create my own reality because I'm the star of the show now. And when you do that, obviously you raise your own self-value and you start to create your own reality, which means you are now being your true self as opposed to that false self that you've been for so long just to socially survive, starting with mom. Um, what probably is happening is your consciousness level is going up, and because you're like the more self love there is, the more intuition there is, the more your consciousness level goes up and the higher your vibration becomes. And when all these things happen, the reality you create becomes more magical. And what that looks like is there's more synchronicity
Mm.
because now you've healed your relationship with the divine feminine, which remember before, bad boundaries usually stems from your mother not transmitting the divine feminine to you. And therefore, you're pretty much that bird who had to help Mother Earth create a papaya for it to eat. I mean, it's just so messed up. Now you've fixed that. So you have a good relationship with the divine mother. So you have abundance, that's magical. Before you had to grind it out in order to pay rent or something like that. Now things just come to you. You're gifted things. You don't have to work hard. They just show up in front of your face without your having to do anything because you now believe that you deserve this reality or that this reality is normal, actually. It's not even, you don't even think that you deserve it necessarily. When you're not there, it's like a stretch to think you deserve it. But when you're there, you don't even think you deserve it. It's here already. Do you ever stop to think, do I deserve to, breathe air? Like, you don't even think that you're such a given. It's like that. So having boundaries can really raise your vibration, really, really raise your vibration in many, many different ways. And by raising your vibration, it makes everything way more magical because the reality you're creating comes from a place of more self-love and more self-value. And the universe just reflects that to you.
Yeah, that's like, one of my favorite kind of definitions or conceptions of magic is this idea of creating your own reality through inner work, that like, energetically the work that you are doing on yourself, doing on your healing, doing on your empowerment has a resonance with the universe because we are, intrinsically connected to the universe. So everything that we do has a reaction, has a chain reaction. Um, yeah, so I think that sounds like huge magic. Yeah, so I like to think about it like, and this image came to mind too when you were speaking about boundaries as magic, and this is, this the energy of kind of receiving and opening to abundance is something I've been working on for a long time, but I'm not all the way there. But I like to think about it like, the kind of posture that you have towards the universe. So if you're thinking that like you don't deserve to receive, that you're not, worthy of your thoughts or your desires being heard or acted upon, it's kind of like this like closed armed posture. Like, like you're kind of like physically, literally closing out pleasure, closing out abundance, closing out receiving. So, for those who are just listening, not watching the video, I am literally crossing my arms over my chest right now. And then when you do this work that kind of permissions you to receive and permissions you towards pleasure and abundance, it's kind of like letting your arms, down and like opening your heart and opening your chest in this kind of like open armed way that, of course, like as you said, it's like it can be more vulnerable to change your posture, but in order to feel vulnerable, in order to feel that feminine, for her to feel safe, we have our strong boundaries, we have our masculine that we trust. And so like having those like structures of support, um that we trust ourselves, that we trust ourselves to take care of ourselves, like allows us to open in this kind of more vulnerable way, which then, allows the blessings and the abundance to come in.
I love that. I totally agree with that. I love that. Thank you
Yeah,
for sharing that.
of course. Thank you for sparking my mind in this way. um yeah, so I'm wondering, we spoke about this a little bit before the show started, but I'm wondering if you want to talk about the relationship between like intuition and boundaries and, people who identify as empaths and kind of what all is mixed up in there.
Oh, yes. Thanks. I'm glad you brought this up. So I really want to disabuse people of the notion that being an empath means you're intuitive. Like, I really, really, really want to hone in on this because I personally think, and of course, no one has to agree with my definition of things, but I'm going to present my definition of things. To me, being intuitive means you are aligned with your spiritual mission. You're aligned with your soul's purpose, which is why you have a high vibrational outcome, because when you are your true self, you are in alignment with the universe. Whereas when you are your false self doing this other ego thing that helps you survive socially, you're not in alignment with the universe. That's why abundance is difficult and all this other stuff. Being an empath is a function of doing that false self stuff. It is a means of social survival.
Hmm.
So to me, the definition of an empath is it's the energetic level of fawning, FAWNING, which is a trauma response. So if you're fawning, you're giving that other person what they want. You're kind of like giving it to them like first. You're kind of, if your mom needed something from you for her to be equivalent to mom-ish, and you wanted that so bad, you'd give that to her, whatever it was. And that's fawning. And being an empath to me is the energetic equivalent of that. And so what you do is you don't have boundaries. You read your mom's energy and you convince yourself you want to do it. You want to give her your energy in some kind of way or do that act of service through merging. And what you do is you merge with the oppressor, which is your mom. You know, that's very different. That's, to me, that's what being an empath is. That's very different than being intuitive. And I'll go back into the empath thing one more time. So if you're an empath, to me, it's a social survival tool. It has nothing to do with you being your true self. It comes from not having boundaries and therefore hurting yourself again and again and again. It means you can't even feel who you really are. Most empaths, they don't even know, they don't even have boundaries. They don't even know what they like. They don't even know what they don't like. They don't even know their true selves at all. Being intuitive is a function of being your true self. It's like the completely other end of the spectrum of energy. So to me, when empaths think that being an empath is something that they have for life, I really want to disabuse you of this notion. It is a learned behavior from trauma, and you will keep recreating it as long as you will have social gain. So you have to be willing to give up that social gain if you want to learn your way out of empathhood, because it's just a trauma response. And no one wants to be in a trauma response their whole lives, unless they do want to be in a trauma response their whole lives. Like it's up to you. But that being an empath has nothing to do with being able to sense your own life purpose and having boundaries and doing that no matter what. It has everything to do with making the other person like you. And it has everything to do with giving your energy away to other people who end up becoming parasitical. And it has everything to do with making the other person primary and making yourself secondary. So it's like literally the complete opposite of being intuitive. So to me, being intuitive means that you have extraordinarily strong boundaries. You come first. Your pleasure comes first. You create your own reality, and your reality is to stand out and be different than what your mom wanted or what society likes, because you have a spiritual mission, and your spiritual mission means you're unique and you have to accomplish it no matter what, and you have to have that kind of self-assurance, and your spiritual GPS system, which is your intuition. And your intuition will say, go to that country, work with that person, whatever. Your intuition will tell you to make a left rather than a right walking down the street. And then you encounter someone, you guys have a conversation. Your intuition is like that. That is literally, it has nothing to do with anyone else. Whereas being an empath has everything to do with someone else. So I really wanted to present that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. Have you ever identified as an empath?
Oh my God. I was like the mega empath, like mega empath.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
And do you think that like through the work that you've been doing and kind of these realizing that it's a trauma response, do you think you've shifted that identity?
Yes. You know what? In the past, even when I was teaching boundaries, I was still in my empathhood. And I personally thought that being an empath was like something you had for life. And then people would ask me, well, how do I stop being an empath? And I was like, oh, you can't. I was like, being an empath is the future, where you just like feel everyone like trees, like trees and their roots is all one tree. The forest is one tree, you know what I mean? So I was like, that's humans, we're all one human. It's those narcissists who need to heal and catch up with us, is what I said. That's a really cute way of seeing it. It's so cute. Like it's very I don't know, it's like a little girl who goes and then at the end everyone's happy. Yeah, It took me a long time to not just not be an empath in day-to-day life when it came to saying yes and no and this kind of thing. The hardest thing for me to do was separate energetically, especially when like giving readings, because when you're giving readings you're like opening yourself up on purpose, and especially because my teacher taught me a lot of empathic reading techniques where you literally mix your aura you
Mm.
mix your energy body with the energy of the thing you're reading, like you just become one merged thing, and that was the main technique she taught me. Oh my god, it was so hard for me to unlearn that because my energy body did that completely unconsciously, completely automatically. And it was extremely hard for me to learn how to have energy boundaries. And um, I mean, there's a lot to say on that. But two things I'll just point out for now is if you want to do something like that, like start to have energy boundaries, number one, real life boundaries come first. You know, energy follows physicality. And also, like having strong mental energy about what your reality should be, that's your greatest shield or weapon when it comes to something like this. Because the empath who usually puts themselves secondary and the other person's primary. So, very, very simple. We're hanging out, time for lunch. We go, oh, we're hungry. Where should we go for lunch? Empath goes, I don't know. Where do you want to go? And then whoever the stronger personality in the situation, even if there's two empaths hanging out, one person will have a stronger personality. So the stronger personality will be like, I want to go there. And then the less strong personality empath will be like, okay, I'm happy with that. I just want to please you. So they don't even think. They don't even think if they really want to eat there or whatever, right? They let the other person make decisions. This is the kind of thing where you have extremely weak mental energy about what your reality should be. That's an example of this. So when you have a psychic attack, when you have a narcissist, when you have anything that requires having energy boundaries, having a strong mental energy about what your reality should be is your shield. So if you have no idea about what your reality should be, so in the empath and lunch situation, if that less strong personality empath doesn't even know where she would go to lunch if it were her choice, you know, she needs to work on that. She needs to work on her alternate. She needs to work on, well, if it were my choice, I'd go there. She needs to work on that because without that, you have no shield. So, so if you want to have energy boundaries, the first thing is you have to work on your regular in life boundaries and not just like bubbly stuff. I've heard so many things. Oh, I just shoot up mirrors, or I just do this. No, no, no. Like if you have low self value, people are going to invade you anyway. You know, it all has to do with your shadow, not your visualization. It has to do with your shadow. It has to do with your vibration. So if your vibration is like, I'm worthy of being invaded, you will be invaded. And it has to do with your shadow. And most people don't think, oh, I like to think that I'm worthy of being invaded. I'm sure that's a part of my shadow. Almost no one thinks that, but most people, if you're being energetically invaded, it's because you have that in your shadow. So you have to address that. And the other thing is the mental energy. I mean, there's a lot more to say there too, but those are the two main things.
And so would you say that like even for people who don't, identify as empaths, like would you say that that kind of investigation is a good starting point to even consider your boundaries? Like where would you recommend someone starting who's never considered their boundaries before?
Yes. So just like general tips on starting to work on your boundaries, I would say ask yourself these two questions. Whose idea is it?
Hmm.
Is it the other person's idea that we go to lunch? You're not even hungry. Is it the other person's idea where you eat? You know, because you couldn't think of a place, you don't know what you like, you don't want to make the other person unhappy. You're happy that they're happy. You know, you're doing the whole indirect pleasure thing. Um, so whose idea is it? And then the other thing is, are you receiving direct pleasure or are you helping the other person with their direct pleasure? So you're doing the indirect pleasure. So just to, make it, narrow it down, whose idea is it? Are you receiving direct pleasure? And I would say just generally, You want it to be more and more and more your idea, which means you're creating your reality.
Hmm.
And you want it to be more and more and more you're receiving the direct pleasure. Because let's just look at all the permutations here. There's only two things. There's A and B. So you can square them, and there's four permutations. So it could be the other person's idea, but the end result is you receive direct pleasure. Oh, good. This is good. Okay. Because you got one out of the two. It could be the other person's idea, but they're receiving the direct pleasure. Okay. No, 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 no. This is your default mode. No, no, like no to this. No to it's the other person's idea and they're receiving the direct pleasure. The other thing is it's your idea and you're receiving the direct pleasure. This is best. This is the strongest position. Practice this a lot because this will be the most uncomfortable, which is why you have to grow here the most. Especially if you want to have a magical reality, especially. So if you want to grow here the most and have a magical reality, raise your vibration, self-value, whole 9 yards, it has to be your idea and you have to receive the direct pleasure. The only alternate left is it's your idea and the other person receives direct pleasure. I would say here actually, no.
Hmm.
No. Why are you creating an idea where the other person gets pleasure? Like that's the same baking a cake thing. That's the same no, no. That is like, oh, I know, I'll do this thing that makes my mom happy. It comes from that. It comes from that trauma. Okay, so like no. So there's a lot of no's. um, and it's very simple, I would say. Like if you can draw a square or a box with lines in it and do the, you know you remember like when we were doing genes and like recessive and it's like that. Do
Yeah.
that box,
Yeah.
the recessive, and yeah, I forgot to say all the words in English. I think you know what I'm
Dominant,
talking about.
dominant. I think
Yes,
dominant,
yes,
recessive. Yeah.
dominant. Yes, there's like a
Yeah.
small R and a big something,
Right.
and you times them. That's what this is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can. I think people get it. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, I like that simple framework. Yeah, whose idea is it, and are you receiving direct pleasure? Because I feel like that's something that's easy to grasp onto. Um, that actually prompts me on a kind of different question, which is something that I had a hard time with when I was first establishing my boundaries, because I felt really good about my boundaries, but then I actually had a hard time n- always respecting other people's boundaries. So my question is, how do you navigate your own boundaries, your own pleasure, your own ideas with someone else who also has their own boundaries, their own pleasure, their own ideas? How do you navigate that without, violating consent, I guess is my question.
Well, that's so interesting. I like this question. I think it depends on the situation. I might have to know a little bit more about specific details about specific instances to answer more directly. But one thing in general is if you are doing your own boundary work, like F other people, F their comfort, because you were probably so concerned with other people and their comfort before that you made yourself uncomfortable to feed their comfort. Another way to look at this is you served them your energy for their pleasure and you put them primary and you were secondary and you therefore became like an energy servant or sometimes an energy slave, which is my term from an empath, by the way.
Hmm.
um, so I think it's a good starting point to be like, my pleasure comes first. I'm the most important, and F other people. That's a good starting point. So now that like if you're stable with that and now you want to play with other people and their pleasure, you need to make sure you're coming from a full heart. Because if their boundaries and your boundaries don't intersect and there is no consent, then don't have an interaction, you know? But your baby, your internal child, your inner baby, her pleasure is always the most important, always. Because if you don't honor that, you're traumatizing yourself all over again. And you're being what I call the narcissistic inner mother, where mom wants something. It doesn't matter if baby's okay with it. That's what's happening. It's kind of like, do it because I said so, you know? And that's what we do to ourselves all the time. And you don't want to engage in that. You always want to put your baby's pleasure primary because this is what engenders trust, surrender, a high vibrational life. Everything that you want comes from honoring your baby's pleasure. Um, Another way to look at this is you have to allow people to take care of themselves. Like if they don't like something, they can leave. If
Mhm.
you're taking care of them for them, aka reading their minds and like, over serving them, you're already outside of consent. So like if like and they become this like lazy parasite position in that case. And then you become sort of like an empath and they become like this energy parasite. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm just thinking about like, the lunch example, like, person A has a desire, like something that would give them pleasure. They want Thai food or whatever. Person B has an idea, a desire, like they want Mediterranean food. Like how do those interact in terms of boundaries for each person if their own boundaries are the most important?
So in this particular case, either if these are babies with boundaries and they're like really practicing, then they might just not eat lunch together. Just
Hmm.
eat lunch separately. If they're not babies and they're more advanced, then both of them need to check within their hearts to see if they can open heartedly serve the other person's reality by
Hmm.
eating at that other place. Um, Obviously, you could pick a third option, which is neither person's first choice, but I don't like that. Someone needs to be having their full pleasure. So most people, they have a hard time giving anything with a full heart
Hmm.
because they're so used to over giving that like almost any kind of giving comes from outside of consent. So that's why I believe that serving the other person by going to their place is a more advanced practice after having your baseline needs met first. Like you have to do your root chakra first.
Hmm.
You can't do your heart chakra first. You have to do your root chakra first. Because if your root chakra isn't taken care of, like you feel safe with yourself. Like you could eat at the place that you wanted to, but you're choosing this time heart chakra to like go to that other person's place. If you don't know that you could ever go to your place first, then you're not heart chakra opening. Let's go to that other person's place. That's an impossibility at this point. Your root chakra needs to be like, my first choice is definitely a possibility. I have it all the time and I trust myself and my reality serves that to me. So today I can open heartedly serve the other person. So that's what I would say to that. And this other thing comes to mind, which is just like, how do you feel your boundaries to begin with? I can go into that in a second, but I'm curious, like, do you have a response to what I just said about the lunch thing?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually love that because I love like, you know, I love making, serving someone else, serving their pleasure. Like I love making that into a choice, not making it into an obligation or not making it into something that like diminishes yourself. And as you said, it's in terms of boundary work, it's an advanced practice, but um it reminds me of that again, that like stable masculine. Like if you have a stable foundation and you trust yourself, then you can have the feminine flow and the feminine flexibility that allows you to, if you choose to do so, to adjust and adapt to your reality in a way that might bring you, secondary pleasure because you're happy to help the person be happy.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah, I'm glad. And one way to easily test to see if this is a safety zone for you is if you feel generous.
Mm,
Like if you feel generous, do it. You're already within consent.
mm,
That's the vibration of being within consent and serving. If you feel resentful, if you feel like you're getting dry, like you're serving something you don't have to give, if you feel like that other person's like lazy or entitled, which is why you feel resentful, don't do it. There's no way you can do the Mediterranean place and be within your boundaries. So you can just check the vibration.
yeah.
um, okay, so I just want to do this one thing, just stick it in there. I could have said this earlier, but basically, also a beginner boundaries practice is like, how do you even feel your boundaries to begin with?
Hmm.
Like, some people don't even know, they don't even know that the Mediterranean place is their like first choice. So, this is a combination of what Betty taught me and things I've added on top, and I'll delineate both. I'll show you the classic version and my version. So the first thing is if there's like a question in the air, like, do you want to do this? To check if it's within your boundaries, first you need to pause.
Hmm.
Because if you just say yes, or if you just say no, which some people do. This is a side note, by the way. A lot of beginner boundary people also say no all the time, thinking it's a good thing, and they're really proud of themselves. And to me, this is extraordinarily frustrating because they just think that because I had such difficulty saying no in the past, I'm just gonna like almost rote default knee jerk say no. And like their ego's really proud. Like I defended myself, I said no. But like that was a really good opportunity for you, and your no came from your ego. It was not serving your inner child. It was not serving your highest vibrational outcome, because the yes in this case might have made you feel a little bit uncomfortable, but it was the discomfort of growth.
Mhm.
And you just said no because you weren't attuned to your inner child or your intuition at all. And you just said no out of rote. And I find this a lot. And it's really frustrating for me to witness because these people think they're practicing good boundaries and they're like literally doing the opposite. So heads up, people, like, like don't always say no and think it's a good thing, there's a lot more to say on that, like discomfort and, growing and, when to go past your boundaries to grow and this other thing. But anyway, how to feel about your boundaries, just like basic, 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 basic. Pause. Don't give an answer right away, whether it's yes or no. Don't give an answer right away. Um, breathe. Breathe for at least 20 seconds.
Mm.
And if you are hyperventilating, that doesn't count. You have to be calm. So if you're not calm and it takes you like 3 days to become calm because you're fucking triggered, then take 3 days.
Mhm.
Don't give an answer before 3 days. And if the deadline has come and gone and you're still triggered, that's a no.
Mhm.
Like don't be pressured by like time pressure or deadlines. If you're not sure, remember that's a maybe. That
Mhm.
means no. That means no. So if people go, do you want this deal? It's going to expire in like 5 minutes, and you feel pressure and you can't feel yourself, the answer is no. So pause, breathe calmly for at least 20 seconds. What that means is your inner mother, which is, I say, lives in your mind. Your inner mother connects with your inner child, which is your body. So you're starting to attune to yourself. So notice what you're feeling. So the calm breathing that connects your mind and your body, right? Breathing does that, which is why we have like breathwork practices. So that is the attunement of the inner mother to the inner child, and then you notice what you're feeling. That's the inner child saying to her mom, "This is how I feel," you know. So notice what you're feeling. Trust it. Don't just like immediately, oh, I can't feel that way. Sometimes you have this like message, you're in a relationship or something, you're kind of scared of the person because you don't trust them, but you're like in the relationship anyway. Sometimes you kind of like, patch over that with your mind because you're like, but it's my boyfriend or whatever, right?
Mhm.
It's my best friend. You have to listen, you have to trust what you're feeling. So notice it, trust it. The other thing is then value it.
Hmm.
So some people come all the way down here and they know that they do not want to eat at that lunch place with their sister, but they don't value their feeling because it's their sister. You know, it's my sister. She had a rough day. So I'm just going to like, serve her today. But you're not coming from a place of full heartedness. So pause, breathe calmly for at least 20 seconds. Notice what you're feeling, trust it, value it. Then you can communicate it. And to me, that is the inner mother telling the inner father, hey, dad, we don't want to go to the party. And then dad says to the exterior world, we don't want to go to the party, you know? And so it's like kind of like pause, which is dad saying, hey, I need a minute to think, or 3 days to think, whatever, Dad communicates with the exterior world. Pause, breathe calmly for at least 20 seconds. That's the inner mother connecting with the inner child. Notice what you're feeling, trust it, value it. That's all inner mother stuff. If you aren't doing these things, it's because you're not mothering yourself. And the place where most people F up is the value it. I will continue now and then go back to that part. After notice what you're feeling, trust it, value it, then you communicate it, which is then the mom says to the dad, hey, we want to do this or we don't want to do this. And dad says to the exterior world, this is our decision. The valuing thing is where most people mess up. And how I can tell this is when people ask me, what is the perfect way for me to turn someone down? And where do you think they are? Like, which like part of that feeling your boundaries thing, where do you think they are?
They think that they've felt their boundaries and they're going to communicate them.
Great. Yes. So now they just want to communicate it like perfectly or something
Hmm.
without hurting the other person's feelings. Okay. So I would say that they think they're there, and I agree with you, but where they are actually at is valuing it. Because if you valued how you feel,
Mm.
I really don't give a shit how you communicate it. You can like shout at someone's face, I don't like you. I think you're ugly. And no, I don't care if you say that. I don't care, because you are defending your inner child. That's your job. Your job is not to take care of the other person's feelings. That's their job, you know? And so, like, if you are doing your boundary stuff, you are going to take care of your feelings and take care of like your boundaries no matter what. And I don't care how you finesse it or you have style when it comes to the end part communication to the outside world. It could be like just ghosting someone and never talking to them again for the rest of your life. That's a pretty clear no, you know, um, because you just don't want to type anything. Like, I don't care. There's no right or wrong. At some point, you might want to really work on this and have some professional no that doesn't hurt other people's feelings. But come on, look, other people are not healed. They have their own like traumas and weird stuff. They get triggered by all kinds of things. There's no way to take care of other people's feelings. So even if you do the nicest no, someone's going to get triggered. I don't understand why people care so much about not triggering other people. Like, other people can take care of themselves. So most people mess up with the valuing it. They just have a hard time with that. And
Yeah.
then they pause with the communication. Like they think that they're effing up with the communication, but there is no perfect communication. Forget that idea. So just do the messy communication. I'm all about the messy communication, but just get it out, and be honest with your inner child.
Yeah. And ideally, I mean, when I think about no's and, think about how women communicate in general, like ideally our no should be kind of like rock solid, like no room for any, rebuttal to kind of sneak in there, and also not include an apology. That's my ideal. Like I don't think that we should ever say sorry for making a decision that serves
Yeah,
our own boundaries. Um,
I like that. And
yeah.
I don't think there needs to be an explanation either, which I think
Hmm.
is similar to the sorry thing. You don't have to explain yourself. Um,
Yeah.
Other people are safer around you when your boundaries are strong. So your solid no makes whoever you said no to safer with you, because you're not like, you know, dilly, or what is it like when you play footsie with something like
Flirting.
pussyfoot? Yeah.
Oh, I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Like,
Pussyfooting around it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That I don't like that term. I don't like that term. Yeah. But
Tiptoeing.
yeah, that's a better term.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So like, yeah, so your firm no means your inner masculine is very well developed, and that means other people are safer around you, because your yes means yes, your no means no, and you
Mm,
have integrity. So
yeah.
like, yeah, someone's boundaries always comes down to their integrity. And if someone does not have integrity and I observe them not having integrity, they make a promise, they don't keep it. Um, they're out of my life, because they're not safe, like, at all.
Yeah.
And they're going to make me into their violator, or they're going to violate me, and it's not going to feel good, and it's going to lower the vibe of like everything. So no, thank you. So I like what you just said about saying no, but I just want to add on to that this like whole other thing, which is sort of like a side thing. But like, don't tolerate people with no integrity. Like, it's like, because if you do that, then you're inviting in such a low vibration that, like, it's like, the to me it's like the other side of the coin, or the other end of the spectrum of this no thing. Because when you're saying you want to say no this way and not that way, to me that's because of integrity. You're practicing integrity. So if you want to keep practicing integrity, the other thing you can do is also delete everyone in your life that doesn't have integrity. So this will really, really, in terms of like vibration, change your life. So if you keep saying no in a clean way, but still invite in people without integrity, you don't have vibrational cleanliness there, in my opinion. And you want vibrational cleanliness, because what you keep in your shadow is how you create your reality. So it's the no thing plus just integrity overall.
Yeah, because those people who don't have integrity, like or if you're one of those people, if you're not sure what your no means and what your yes means and you say it, but it doesn't have real deep meaning behind it, then you're inviting people to violate your boundaries. You're inviting people to like trigger you and harm you. And for me, like that, yeah, I feel like that the murkiness of that just creates more like fertile ground for conflict and for harm and stuff like that. Whereas if we're sure of ourselves, then we're able to, ideally communicate, this is my need, this is my boundary. And if ideally the other person is respecting that, then we can, avoid that kind of harm, which for me is I try to avoid harm whenever possible. Yeah.
I like that. Well, I agree with your stance. And I think the flip side of what you just said is besides avoiding harm, you actually invite in intimacy, which I really
Mm,
like. Um, yeah, having someone trustworthy, and you're trustworthy, that's pretty delicious.
mm,
I just wanted to backtrack for 1 second because I had just said I would do it and then I didn't do it, which is, Betty's boundaries thing
mhm,
was like breathe for at least 20 seconds.
mhm,
Notice what you're feeling, trust it, value it, communicate it. What I added was pause, especially for empaths. Sometimes pause for like 3 weeks if you're triggered for 3 weeks, which sometimes you are, okay? So I added pause. I also added breathe calmly. And then I added all that stuff about the inner mother and inner father and inner child.
yeah. Thank you for clarifying. I'm wondering, I mean, this is kind of a, I don't know what kind of a question this is, but this is, I'm wondering if you can just talk about like what a yes feels like in your body for if anyone doesn't know how to determine that.
Oh, sure. And before I even say that, it comes to mind that you might have way fewer yeses than you realize. You might have way
Mm,
more maybes than you realize. So a yes to me feels like immediate, no thinking, immediate joy. Like I'm running towards it. I can't wait for it to happen. It feels like it expands me. It's like my inner child gets to play. And it's like the same feeling as, do you remember when you were little and you got to go to the playground and you got to play? Like, like that feeling of like, I get to play and you get to go on the swing set and, the things, whatever you like to do. Maybe you didn't like that, or maybe you got to go to the sandbox and you really, really, really liked that, whatever you liked. Like when you were a little kid and you're like literally running when it was recess, like running to that thing on the playground that you wanted to play with, that like, that feeling. It's a very similar feeling. It's a very, very similar feeling. So with the yes, yes, you don't even think about it. There's no pause. There's no like, it's just your body sings, your body is like open and it feels extremely delicious and happy and fun. Like when you're a little kid and you get to do your favorite thing. Um, and so you can see that there's actually very few yeses. There's way more maybes, in which case you should be saying no a lot. Yeah. Especially if you are an empath, you need probably way more time to yourself than you realize,
mm,
and way more time to recharge because you're almost like chronically depleted, and you probably have like adrenal fatigue, like literally.
mhm,
And
mhm,
I'm laughing, but yeah, it's a little close to home, and just like yeah, like like you kind of you need more time and you need more like space, and until you can unlearn the empath thing, there's much more self-care that needs to take place. Whereas when you have more energy, when you're no longer like a clinical empath, it's clinic to me, it's a clinical thing. If you're no longer a clinical empath, then it's so interesting. There's like clinical narcissists, but we don't say clinical empath. I want to say clinical empath because it's the same thing. It just is the other side of the narcissist. Anyway, um, when you're no longer a clinical empath, you will have more energy and you will have more opportunities to say yes because your life will vibrate like that. Your life will
mm.
vibrate more joyfully. So I also wanted to say that.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Um, Yes, I feel like I feel like we've covered a lot of ground, and I think we can kind of move towards closing our conversation. Is there anything that you haven't said about boundaries, or anything at all on this topic that you want to kind of share with our listeners?
Did I did I talk about boundaries and intuition? I don't
Yes,
remember.
we
Okay.
talked about. Well, we talked about that with the empath thing. Um,
Oh, yes. I think I just want to add one tiny little shade of
Hmm.
meaning there. Most people want to open their intuition, but they don't want to do the rigor and the discipline it takes to open your intuition. They just want it to be like a trick that they have easy access to without necessarily doing like the work of healing. This is what I observe. So you can disagree with me there, obviously. To me, if you want to open your intuition, number one, if you have an intuition, you have to follow it. So that's an aside. That's more of an intuition talk, but you have to have good boundaries, because without good boundaries, there is no intuition. Without intuition, there are no good boundaries. They are two sides of the same coin. And I think I did say this earlier, that boundaries are masculine and intuition is feminine. But intuition is your body voice. Boundaries is merely respecting your body voice. And so if you're not so interested in boundaries per se, but you're very, very interested in intuition, then you have to do your boundaries work. You know, and vice versa. Like if you're not so interested in like intuition work but really interested in boundaries, you have to do your intuition work. You know, because if you can't listen to your body voice, then you don't know if anything's a yes or no, and there's nothing to communicate to the outside world as a yes or a no. So I wanted to underline that as well, that they just kind of go hand in hand. And that's another reason why boundaries can be magical. And, you know, intuition is a very high, high, high frequency to live in and live life from. And it's very pleasurable. So, and it's like your inner child playing all the time. So, um, yes, I wanted to say that.
That's beautiful. Yeah, it's, you know, yeah, like you said, boundaries and intuition are two sides of the same coin. And like, yeah, it just sounds like all of this work is in service of raising your vibration, which, you know, involves healing, which involves shadow work, which we'll get into in another episode. um, but it involves, yeah, it's in service of creating a more beautiful, more pleasurable life. And all of that, like, it is magic, it is medicine, it is all of it, because it involves like, you know, reupholstering your inner world in a way that like feels really good to you. um
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. I love that. And thank you. Thank you for saying that. And I just wanted to underline one more time that inner world that you're talking about, that is you being your true self, not that false self anymore, you know, being your true self. And I think that is the most pleasurable, you know, and like to bring your medicine to the world. I personally think that everyone is a very particular frequency. It's unique to them. No one else is like that in the world. It's literally a frequency. It's like literally a vibration. And I personally think that everyone's spiritual mission is to be that vibration, live that vibration, share that vibration. So if you're doing anything else, if you are rotting away in a cubicle doing an office job and not being your true self, you are doing a huge disservice, not just to you, but to me and the rest of the world, because we deserve your true self. We deserve your frequency. And to me, it's very similar to the most important tree or plant or whale on Earth that's like holding down the ecosystem of the whole planet, deciding to like pretty much die and put up like a false body and go do something else on the side. To me, it feels just as tragic. It doesn't just feel, to me, it is just as tragic. So it's really important for everyone to be their true selves, because you're holding down this ecosystem of like all of us. It's real. It's so please do your boundaries work and be your true self.
Yes. And I also love what you just said, because it kind of takes that, you know, that ideal life, that pleasurable life of being in your true frequency, your vibration. It takes it away from like fantasy realm or like far off goal that you have to like, you know, suffer and strive in order to get there. Like there, you know, there is hard work along the way, but it actually brings it out of fantasy realm and brings it more into like, actually, like, not only is it my birthright to have this pleasurable life, but I actually have an obligation to the entire planet to have this pleasurable life. So it takes it from fantasy to like necessary. And I love that.
Yeah, I'm glad. I totally feel this way. I totally feel this way. You know, like each frequency has that magic, you know, so when you show that frequency, it literally makes that vibration accessible to other people. So it's like all the medicines of the world are now accessible as opposed to hidden. So I literally think like that and feel that way and view the world like that.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for being here today. And I'd love, and I can also make, announcements at the top of the show, but if you want to share how people can find you, work with you, and if you want to talk about your boundaries course, that's coming up, I invite you to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So currently I'm findable on Firebird's site. I also have a YouTube channel called Seulki Avatar. I also have an Instagram handle, Seulki period avatar. I also have a Clubhouse handle, Seulki period avatar. Um, Facebook, I'm also Seulki Avatar. And soon I'll be having something called Mighty Networks Community where you can join and find your other avatars and hang out with each other. That's coming soon. And starting February 21st, Sunday, I'll be teaching a 4-week course on boundaries. And it's not just boundaries, it's like the formula for figuring out exactly how you're creating the reality that you've been creating and how to do it in a more conscientious way. Because most people don't want to think that they want to be a victim. And yet, the end result is they kind of feel like a victim to their life circumstances and they don't feel like they're in their full power. So, where is your power? Like, seriously, if you feel like you're not in your full power, where is your power? When did you give it up, or when was it taken from you? How can you find it? What does it look like to be in your full power? And so I think for many people, what they don't realize is that, I mean, again, this is my opinion, so you don't have to agree. You put your own power somewhere yourself, and you can find it very easily if you let go of the fear of being that person that I just talked about, the true self. So um, this course goes deep into shadow work, deep into how you create your reality, and then you actually make yourself into a victim. If you feel like a victim, you did it. And most people don't get that. They think, oh, yes, I create my own reality. My exterior world reflects my interior world, da 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 da. But how? Like, exactly how? I'll show you. I'll pinpoint A to B to C to D in terms of energy dynamics.
Mm.
This will really help you if you are interested in shadow work, because shadow work is a little bit hard to do because your shadow is literally what your ego doesn't want to see. So it's like looking behind yourself is very, very difficult. But with this kind of work, it's actually very mappable. And for those people who are not interested just in healing and like, having a high vibe or something like this, but truly being a self master, to truly be the creator of your own reality, to not give your willpower over to anything else. This is a great blueprint for how to have self mastery in your life and to not give your willpower away. So to me, this is for people who really want to have that power back in a real way that we can talk about and feel, that you can actually do real things in real life, as opposed to this kind of airy fairy, I would like to be empowered, like whatever that means, It's like taking responsibility for yourself in a real way and also becoming like a boundaries master. Because I'm going to really teach you the boundaries inside, outside, inner wheel, outer wheel, inner mother, inner father, all that good stuff.
I love it. Thank you so much. Yeah, and so you can find information about this course and about Seulki on Firebird's website, which is firebirdhealingarts.com. So if you're interested, that starts on Sunday the 21st, next Sunday. Um, Seulki, thank you so much again for being here. This is a beautiful conversation, and I really appreciate the depth of your wisdom on this topic. I feel like it takes it so many levels deeper, and so thank you for being here.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for having me. It was really enjoyable. Super full body yes.
Great. Great. All right. Well, we will say goodbye, and I am sure that we will see you back on this podcast in the future.
Yay. All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.